Let's begin. The National Assembly has already approved Mr. President's emergency rule. Now, lawmakers also drew the attention to the constitutional provision that allows the National Assembly to make laws for a state at any time the State Assembly is unable to perform its functions. They disagreed with President Tinubu's position that the Federal Executive Council would usurp this function. What side of the argument do you stand?
Well, it's an interesting time, for us in Nigeria. Yet again, we have a milestone that will now be etched in the annals of political history of Nigeria. Indeed, the decision by Mr. President, as tough as it is, I believe is a necessary means to an end, given the political logjam we found ourselves in Rivers. It appears the dramatis personae, we are not ready to back down on either side. And the only way to safeguard the integrity of the state and the people, and of course the wealth which belongs to us all in Nigeria, was to take this decision. To answer pointedly to your question, I like the fact that the two chambers of the National Assembly are able to correct, that particular part of the proclamation. I was a bit worried, when I saw that Mr. President would like FEC to oversee the affairs of the state. Already tempers are flying very high, and rightly so, by various interested parties in this country, that why should we suspend the governor and then at the end of the day the FEC will now oversee, whereas first of all there's a clear provision of the Constitution that gives the National Assembly the powers, and rightly so, so that you cannot probate and reprobate. Secondly, from a strategic perspective, a very key interested party is a member of the Federal Executive Council, and that is the Honorable Minister of FCT. So one would say, even if the provision is not there, it will only be fair and provide that balance for Mr. President and for Nigerians, that indeed there's a level of fairness if it is treated as arm's length from the FEC, which is presided over by Mr. President, and of a key member of the FEC is an interested party. So it's the right thing to do for them to now, correct that, request by Mr. President. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, that's a step in the right direction, that the National Assembly will now provide that oversight.
And before the National Assembly gave its permission, endorsed the proclamation, there were arguments of different quarters saying that the National Assembly should not, because according to the people, some persons that the president shouldn't have suspended the governor and the House of Assembly. And they were saying, okay, it's only the National Assembly that could stop that move. And what do you think of those arguments that they shouldn't have suspended the governor? They were not against the state of emergency, but it shouldn't have.
Well, I tend to think to differ with profound respect to fellow Nigerians, including thought leaders and opinion leaders. Now, sometimes we try to be politically correct, but then what is practical in the circumstance? You proclaim state of emergency in a state where you have, and rightly so, an elected, executive governor, an elected legislature at state level. How could you proclaim state of emergency and appoint a sole administrator and at the same time have an executive governor to run the state? It is akin to having two captains in a ship. And that is also going to be a crisis situation. One person has to lead the state. And therefore, even though the provision is not clear in the Constitution that when the state of emergency is proclaimed, the governor should remain suspended, it depends on the approach of the chief executive of the country at that time. If we step back a little bit in history, President Goodluck Jonathan was able to proclaim state of emergency in some northeastern states without suspending the governor. Okay. And he was able to provide that intervention. State of emergency, but the legislature and the executive remained in office. President Olusegun Obasanjo in 2003 and subsequently in Ekiti declared state of emergency. In both cases, sole administrators came in. Governor Joshua Dare at that time of Plateau came back later and all that, water under the bridge. But we have a very different scenario now. The different scenario we have is we have a situation whereby even if Mr. President did not state it to say they are suspended, how do you expect the state of emergency to work with a situation where you move in the troops to provide security to the critical infrastructure of the state? How do you expect a state where the governor cannot work with the legislature, and obviously the legislature are not able to work with the governor? So what you have is a political cul-de-sac that you have to apply political sagacity and wisdom to provide a situation where the people of Rivers can able to have governance. Remember, the Supreme Court has already stopped the payment of the monthly subvention to the state. So even if you allow the governors and the legislature to continue functioning, which is already an ambiguous situation, it presupposes that the state will be stifled of funds. So given the situation, you have to find a strategic solution to provide that emergency rule whereby someone else that is quote and unquote neutral, you may argue he's not or not, but someone that come and push the needle of governance in the state. And then within the 6 months, we wait and see how things play out. Because it is a political logjam. Even if they are not suspended, they have already suspended themselves to the effect that none of them is ready to move on board. And then the Supreme Court has come now to stop any activity by both parties as far as I'm concerned. The only way for us to have governance, and my interest is not the two, the legislature or executive, the political players, they are all the same. My interest is the people of Rivers. My interest is the territorial integrity and the unity of Nigeria. Indeed, Rivers is highly strategic, and we should not allow anything to happen to Rivers and the people of Rivers State.
But Madam Yusuf, would you blame the National Assembly for failing to intervene when the Rivers State House of Assembly was demolished and the governor prevented them from carrying out their constitutional duties? They had an opportunity to invoke relevant laws and take control of the state parliament, which might have prevented the crisis from escalating to this point.
I totally agree with you, because as far as I'm concerned, the National Assembly cannot exonerate themselves from dropping the ball in this very crucial and sensitive, matter of national security, of political stability, and the integrity of the process of politicking in Nigeria. With profound respect to the National Assembly, and especially in this regard, the so-called opposition caucuses in the green and the red chamber, whereas they are not able to hold their own and provide that buffer or counterbalance, and to be the conscience, if you like, of the National Assembly, to call other colleagues and say, let's do this, and pressure them. It appears, the opposition caucuses, whether it is Labour Party or the PDP or NNPP or SDP, are either gone to sleep or have also decided to play along. And in that case, I personally am disappointed, because Mr. President had made efforts. You can say he did right or wrong, but why are we not doing what you have done now to say, why are we looking at the critical function of the National Assembly, given the situation where a governor has demolished the State Assembly, which is the same thing they did when Governor Obaseki of Edo State demolished the State Assembly, and they sat on their hands and pretended it is none of their business, whereas it is a core responsibility of the National Assembly. So I totally agree with you, and that is why we are where we are today. So whatever Mr. President has done is a function also of the failure of the legislature, which is the most crucial arm of government in a democracy, by the way. And the lesson going forward is for us to now start, speaking to the National Assembly to be more alive to their responsibility rather than being just transactional and operational. It is a very strategic, arm of government that in a dictatorial, setting is not active. So if they are active now, why are we having these situations that are protracted, especially when you have opposition, caucuses in the National Assembly?